There are places in the world where silence speaks louder than words, and the mountains are among them. For centuries, people have gone to the high places of the earth, not to escape life, but to understand it. This story begins with a man named Daniel Harper, a New York architect whose life was falling apart faster than he could rebuild it. His days were spent inside steel towers and glass walls, chasing deadlines that seemed to erase his sense of meaning. After the loss of a major project and a relationship that crumbled under the weight of his ambition, Daniel found himself standing on the edge of burnout, tired, lost, and wondering if this was all life had to offer. One evening, as he sat staring out his window, he came across an old postcard his father had sent him years ago. It was a photograph of a mountain range in Colorado with a handwritten note. "When the world gets too loud, go where it's quiet. The mountains will teach you what matters." Daniel had ignored that note for years, but something about that night pushed him to listen. He booked a one-way ticket to Colorado, packed little more than a jacket, a notebook, and his father's old compass, and left without telling anyone where he was going. The journey up the mountain was harder than he expected. The air grew thin, and his phone lost signal hours before he reached the top. There were no emails to answer, no meetings to attend. Only the sound of wind moving through pine trees and his own breathing echoing against the cliffs. At first, the silence unnerved him. Without the noise of the city, he had to face the noise inside his own head. The regrets, the questions he had buried under constant motion. He realized that for years, he had been running not towards something, but away from stillness. On the third day of his hike, a storm rolled in. The sky darkened quickly, and Daniel found himself caught in a downpour miles from shelter. He took refuge under a rock ledge, shivering and frustrated, cursing his decision to come. He felt small, a man from the city, pretending to belong in nature's kingdom. But as the storm raged, he noticed something remarkable. The trees around him bent under the wind, but they didn't break. Their roots, hidden deep in the soil, held them firm. The mountain stood silent and unmoved, letting the storm pass over it without resistance. For the first time, Daniel saw the quiet strength and surrender. The idea that resilience isn't about fighting everything, but about standing firm and letting life's storms shape you, not destroy you. That night, he lit a small fire and sat listening to the rain fade into the distance. The mountains weren't speaking in words, but he felt their message clearly. You can't control the storm, but you can choose how deeply you root yourself. He wrote those words in his notebook, the first thing he had, written in months that wasn't he for work. The next morning, when the sun rose, he saw the landscape transformed. What had looked gray and lifeless under the storm was now shimmering with light. Streams ran bright with melted snow, and birds called from branches, heavy with rain. It was as if the mountain was reminding him that beauty often comes after chaos, but only for those who endure. Over the next few days, Daniel stayed in a small cabin near the ridge. He met an old ranger named Thomas who had lived there for over 30 years. Thomas was a man of few words, but his presence was steady, like the rocks themselves. Over coffee one morning, Daniel asked him, "Don't you ever get lonely up here?" The old man smiled and replied, "You're only lonely when you forget how to listen." These mountains talk all the time. Most folks just don't stay quiet long enough to hear them. That sentence stayed with Daniel. He realized he had been so focused on building his life that he'd forgotten to live it. He had been listening to everything except himself. As days passed, Daniel began to find peace in the rhythm of the mountains, the slow sunrise, the shifting clouds, the way time moved without hurry. He climbed a nearby peak one morning and looked down at the valley below. For the first time in years, it felt small but not insignificant. The vastness of the view reminded him that his problems, though heavy, were not the whole world. They were just clouds passing through his sky. He sat there for hours, feeling the wind on his face, the solid earth beneath him, and the quiet whisper of the mountains telling him that life doesn't need to be controlled to be meaningful. It just needs to be lived with awareness. When it was time to return to the city, Daniel felt different. The climb down wasn't easier, but his heart was lighter. He knew the challenges would still be their deadlines, traffic, expectations, but he carried with him a new understanding. Peace isn't found in escaping the noise, it's found in learning to be still within it. Back in New York, Daniel didn't quit his job or abandon his life. Instead, He began living it differently. He started walking to work, leaving his phone off during meals, and taking moments throughout the day to breathe, to listen, to remember the quiet strength of the mountains. Months later, his colleagues noticed the change. He was calmer, more focused, less reactive. When they asked what had happened, he simply smiled and said, "I went where the Wi-Fi is weak, but the signal is strong." And though they laughed, he meant every word, because he had learned that success built on stress isn't strength, it's noise. True strength is quiet. It bends like the trees, stands like the mountain, and whispers softly, "Be still, you are enough." And sometimes that's the lesson the mountains whisper. Not to climb higher, but to go deeper.